the NFL 100 all-time team series that I've been telling you about for weeks and months. Episode 5 of 6 will be Friday night at 8 Eastern time, involving the wide receivers. Last week with the tight ends and offensive linemen, it was my favorite moment of the entire series to date that's aired. And just to set the stage, Tony Gonzalez of the tight end group is sitting there. Anthony Munoz, the offensive lineman, sitting right in front of me. And Belichick and Cris Collinsworth to my right, as they have been for the entire series. And we're talking about the next 2 coaches to be named to the all-time team list. Paul Brown of the Bengals. Mm-hmm. But before that, Vince Lombardi is named, which led me to ask a question of Belichick that everybody's been wanting to ask him, I think. And I took a shot here. And the Belichick, who's been so effusive and passionate, disappeared. Take a look. I don't think anybody in my business would ask you this question in a normal question and answer setting and expect an answer. So I'm going to ask it.
So should I revert to my press conference answer?
Well, just so you know, we are going to move on to somebody associated with Cincinnati after this answer. So when you hear you referred to as the modern day Lombardi, what do you think of when you hear that?
I really haven't thought about it much, Rich.
You went right to the press conference. I love it.
Flattering, but because you are aware that people do refer to you as that, correct?
I haven't really spent a lot of time worrying about that.
You got nothing coming. You knew it when you asked the question. You had nothing coming.
Can't fault you. It's a good question.
And joining us on the show from Football Night in America, Cris Collinsworth, Sunday Night Football.
I forgot how funny that was. I forgot about that one. That's great.
I mean, you turned to me, you're like you knew you were going to get shut down, but I asked him.
Come on, Rich. You knew what was going to happen. Oh, it was great. That was like the Lawrence Taylor stuff.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, because I'll be honest with you, I haven't seen the last 2 shows. We've been trying to crank out all the stuff we're doing on Sunday night, but the Lawrence Taylor stuff, it just fractured me. I mean, I literally could not. I had to get myself back together after watching that guy. He was so funny.
He was, and he was only slated to stay for 1 segment too, and he stayed for several of them, including the Joe Green segment. That, Chris, I mean, and this was a moment where I think you and I kind of shared a look with each other too. That at least I recall this, is that Belichick asked the first question of Joe Green. And I thought to myself, he goes, I got to ask you something. And I thought in my head, I'm like, okay, here comes a question about the Steel Curtain or about Chuck Noll. Instead, he asked him about his Coke commercial. And I'm like, who is this guy? I'm like, right?
I think that was the biggest takeaway, and I thought it would be after we finished all the shows, is that this was a Belichick. I think that maybe you and I had seen at various times, away from press conferences, away from, whatever, production meetings or whatever, that there's this human element to this guy. But it came out a lot more than I even expected. I thought he would be really guarded, and the thing that made it really interesting for me was, and I think surprised him, he really can be effusive. If you've heard one of his Wednesday press conferences where he's talking about the star players for other teams, it's pretty effusive, right? I mean, he goes on and on about, this is the greatest guy ever. But I think he really got surprised with the way that the players were talking about him, and what an honor it was to be in the room with him, and what a incredible career. I think it was Emmett who at one point said, well, you're talking about me? You're the one that holds all this. You know what I mean? It's like, and I think it almost, that part of it, I think caught him a little bit off guard and opened him up in a way that maybe he wouldn't have otherwise.
I saw the same thing too, Chris, in the way, again, that the NFL films people who are so terrific at what they do set things up with that monument board where everybody had their tile placed when they got, inducted, for the lack of a better phrase, or named. Belichick was sitting right in front of that. And I remember Dion, I think it was either in a commercial break or he may have even said it on the air. Dion's like looking at Bill as he's looking at the wall, and he's looking at Bill, and it's like, what are you doing here? And the fact that Bill was there to welcome them in, for a lot of guys who got in the Pro Football Hall of Fame and thought that they may never have that feeling again of accomplishment and humility, got it again. And we watched that together in person, Cris.
Yeah, and it was interesting. I think it was Dion who at one point said something like, okay, this is great, but now we want to know who's in the starting lineup, right?
That's right.
Never is. No matter what we do, you can't narrow it down enough for these competitive guys that always want to be considered the best. But it was really great. I mean, and the way they're busting each other's chops. If you remember, Ray Lewis referred to his grandfather told him he has to watch this player, right? And it probably came out in about 5 or 6 stories that we were doing. And that was just, I don't know why, it just ended up, that was the way he opened his comments about other players as he was going on. And at one point, Lawrence Taylor was sitting next to Ray, and Ray said, "You want to know who told me that I had to watch whoever it was that plays that?" And LT had the greatest deadpan of all time. He looked over at him and he goes, "Let me guess, your grandpa?" And I mean, none of us could get it back together again. I don't know how they edited that thing. I don't know how it came out exactly. But, oh, my goodness, there were moments when I laughed as hard as I've laughed all year on that show.
Agreed. I mean, and Belichick telling the story about LT being late to a defensive meeting, and he basically told Parcells afterwards, just to let you know, LT was late for 5 minutes. And Parcells said, "Why'd you start the meeting without him?"
Why didn't you wait on him?
That was amazing. But then there was another moment, too, Cris Collinsworth here on the Rich Eisen Show, that struck me. You were the one who started the conversation with Ed Reed about a play that you saw. Peyton Manning got completely fooled because Ed had broken a tendency all year long that he had studied of Manning and prepared to break his own tendency to fool Peyton Manning. And Belichick stopped you mid-story to finish the play that had nothing to do with the Patriots. He knew what you guys were talking about.
You know why? Because he actually, I think they played the next week or something like that. And, I mean, it really was one of the Hall of Fame plays. So, I think people knew what they were talking about a little bit. But that was the thing with Bill is that, I feel like you can and I can take these conversations to a certain level. But at some point, somebody who's actually game planned against these players, right, that's a whole different level of what you're willing to do or not do. And that was part of the magic of that show.
For more of The Rich Eisen Show, tune to Audience Channel 239 on DirecTV for free on BR Live or download the Rich Eisen Show app.